Welcome back to the Reversing Autoimmune series. This is Gabriel Arruda with reversingautoimmune.com, and in this segment, we're going to talk about stress, autoimmunity, and how to decrease it. So let me start by asking a question. Is stress bad? That kind of seems like a no-brainer, right? Is stress bad? But you know what the answer is? It depends. It depends if stress is bad or not. If it's short-term stress, it's actually not a problem. The body can handle that. The body can deal with short-term stress. It's designed to do that. Whether it's almost getting in a car accident or a really, really hard gym workout or having to make a really quick decision at work, that's a short-term stress response. The body can deal with that. However, chronic stress is deadly. Short-term stress, okay. Chronic stress, not okay. It's deadly. Now, if stress is supposed to be a short-term response, then how do people end up with chronic stress? How does that occur? So here's the problem. People get into a situation that causes stress, and then there is something that keeps them there. There's something holding them in that chronic stress situation. Now, what role does stress play in autoimmunity? Dr. Eric Berg is a well-known doctor who treats autoimmunity, and he says he's seen hundreds of autoimmune patients. And he says when he asks them when their autoimmune symptoms started, he says, quote, "They always tell me it happens after a stress event." Usually after the loss of a loved one, a divorce, an injury, loss of a job, something like that. He says he's never seen an autoimmune condition where stress was not a factor. That's serious. That means there is a strong connection between stress and autoimmune diseases. And if you look at your own situation, if you're watching this and you have an autoimmune disease, just think about your own situation. Did your symptoms start after a really stressful event or a stressful time in your life? And for me, in my situation, I could say absolutely yes. My autoimmune symptoms really picked up, and when I really got news that I was dealing with autoimmunity was after a really stressful time in my life. I found out the news, as you've heard my testimony probably, within 6 months after my mom passing. And my mom's passing was a really, really stressful time. I was really close with my mother. Not just that, my wife and I worked really hard for months to try to save her. And so the whole situation was just very stressful. And so in my own situation, stress was really key to really getting my autoimmune situation revved up. Now, there are 3 types of stress. There's physical stress, there's emotional stress, and then there's chemical stress. Here's the thing, the body responds the same to all 3. Biologically, the body responds the same to all 3 of those, whether it's physical, emotional, or chemical, generally speaking. Pregnancy can actually be one of those stress triggers. And this could be due to the stress of pregnancy or the stress of the delivery itself. It's a stressful time for women. Hashimoto's occurs in 3 to 5 out of every 1,000 pregnancies. Women come down with Hashimoto's. That's quite a bit. Graves' disease occurs in 1 out of about every 500, 1 out of 500 pregnancies. And so not just that, you have a lot of hormones being fluctuating inside of a woman, and estrogen has been shown, it's been proven to be very, very, it's very potent. It modulates the immune system really potently, so it can really induce an autoimmune response. Now, I want to talk about what's happening biologically inside someone's body when they get into a really stressful situation, when they get into a stress state. So, when you perceive, and it's all about your perception, when you perceive that you are in an emergency situation, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And that's what we all know as the flight or fight response. Fight or flight response. And this is good because it keeps you alive in emergencies. And so let's use an example of this. Let's say you're driving. It's a rainy day and you're driving down the road and you come to a particular part in the road where there's lots of water. And as you're driving through this part, a big truck goes really fast next to you and just splashes a bunch of water up on your windshield. and you're thinking, oh man, you turn on your windshield wipers and you're just trying to get this buckets of water off your windshield. And by the time you get all that water off, it's still raining and it's cold and slippery. You look through your windshield and you realize you've actually veered into oncoming traffic and there's a semi heading right for you. Okay, what's happening in your body right at that minute? As soon as you realize, I'm going into oncoming traffic, there's a semi coming to me, what's happening in your body? Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, your blood sugar also increases, cholesterol goes up, stress hormones are shooting into your body, your pupils dilate. Not just that, there are things that shut down. Your immune system virtually shuts down. You see, our immune system is very metabolically expensive. It takes lots of energy to run your immune system, and so that gets shut down because the body's trying to deal with a short-term emergency. Blood supply is decreased to the gut. Do you remember where most of our immune system is found? In the gut. That's right, 80%. And so blood supply is reduced there, so that's going to affect our immune system on top of that. And also the body shuts down digestion. Digestion is also very metabolically expensive. It takes lots of energy to digest. And the body says, hey, we don't need to do any of that right now. We need to survive. We need to get out of an emergency. And so it shuts down all these things. The body is simply prioritizing to meet an emergency. Now, this is a great way to get out of an emergency. This is a fantastic system that the body has. But this is a terrible way to live. Great way to get out of an emergency, terrible way to live. And essentially, you're in a temporary inflammation state. Here's the problem. If that inflammation state isn't temporary, if it's continual, lots of issues happen, lots of issues occur. And this physical response to emotional feelings is not imagined. There are actual biological things happening in your body. So when we come under what we call adrenal stress, so the adrenal glands are working super hard, it actually weakens the body's disease blockades. And from those symptoms, those different features, those different things that happen when the body goes into a sympathetic nervous system dominant state, we saw it brought down the immune system. And such as the GI tract, the blood-brain barrier actually becomes more vulnerable. And for a few seconds, this isn't bad. For just to get out of an emergency, a few seconds, few minutes, not that big of a deal. But when it happens for days, when it goes on for weeks, months, some people even years are in these states for years, kind of a boiling, long-term, low-stress, continual state. And when this happens, the body's defense systems are weakened. This allows toxins, this allows all kinds of things to come in and start confusing and weakening the immune system that contributes to autoimmune diseases. And here's what's happening today. People are getting into a stress state and something is holding them down and actually keeping them there. They're under chronic stress. They get in that state, you're only supposed to be in there for a short amount of time, they can't get out. Something holds them there, something keeps them there. And so the driving in the rain example I gave, that's a result or an example of emotional stress. And so remember, the body really responds the same way, generally speaking, to physical, emotional, and chemical stress. And so something physical, something emotional, or something chemical can keep you into that chronic stress state, that sympathetic dominant stress state. So I want to talk about stress and toxicity. When we're stressed, what's happening is our hypothalamus releases hormones that signal the pituitary and the adrenal glands to release certain steroid hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol. You've probably heard of adrenaline, or people who are called adrenaline junkies where they jump off cliffs and stuff. I used to be an adrenaline junkie actually. And that's a real hormone that is secreted in the body to help you deal with emergencies. Now, short term, the body could deal with that, not a problem. Large amounts over a long period of time, these hormones could actually become very toxic to our bodies. It's not good for us. The National Institute of Health published an article in the Journal of Autoimmune Diseases in which it says chronic stress affects the composition of the gut microbiota. Remember we talked about the gut bacteria and how important that is? Stress affects that negatively. And chronic stress also makes the gut leaky. So there you are, leaky gut and gut dysbiosis, the two foundations we talked about of autoimmune diseases, a damaged gut. And stress affects both of those aspects of a damaged gut. So stress is very, very crucial to autoimmune diseases. It really makes an impact. Now, let's talk about that gut bacteria a little bit. Now, you remember, we have good gut bacteria and bad gut bacteria. The good, we want to make sure that's in elevated good amounts. And the bad, it's okay to have a little bit, but not too much. We want to keep those bad boys down, right? If they get too high, they take control of the gut. And remember, we get into a world of hurt. We're talking depression, we're talking anxiety, insomnia, brain fog, chronic fatigue, anemia, all these things. This is a result of having an imbalanced bacterial situation happening in our guts. How does stress affect that? We heard that quote from the National Institutes of Health, but I want to back that up with a really interesting experiment some scientists did. They had two Petri dishes, and in both Petri dishes, they had E. coli, which is generally speaking a bad bacteria. One Petri dish, they just had the normal solution there with the E. coli. The other one, they had solution with E. coli, but they also injected a bunch of adrenaline fluid into that Petri dish. They let the Petri dishes alone. They went home, came back the next morning to work, and they looked at both the Petri dishes. You know what they found? The normal Petri dish had pretty much normal amounts. The one that had the adrenaline squirted into it had 10,000 times the amount of E. coli. That adrenaline, it just, boom, just blows up, just drastically increases the rate of production of bad bacteria. And so when you're really stressed, what's being secreted? Adrenaline and cortisol. And so not only is it breaking down those barriers, those immune system barriers, it's also just taking that bad bacteria and just feeding that stuff and just amping it up. And so very, very bad. And you know, I don't know if you've ever felt this before. When you get really scared, I don't know about you, I could actually feel the adrenaline secreting in my body. Half of it, by the way, when it's secreted, half of it goes right into your stomach. So right into your digestive tract. And I could actually feel it. Maybe you felt like butterflies in your stomach or you got really scared. I can actually feel that, that just queasy feeling inside. Now, this leads to an interesting fact about weight distribution. Weight distribution in the body. Did you know that where you carry weight on your body actually tells a story of what's going on with your hormones? It actually tells a story of whether your hormones are in or out of balance. Weight in the belly, in the seat, and in the thighs is a sign of high cortisol. High cortisol, that's where people put on weight, where they have lots of cortisol. That's a stress hormone. So when you see a lot of weight going in the belly, seat, and thighs, that potentially could be the sign of someone under chronic stress, which also probably contributes to them eating food to comfort themselves, which, what's that do to the situation? It makes it a lot worse, doesn't it? And, you know, illness is terrible. It's like a snowball. It grows, one thing adds to another. And as I mentioned before, you know, people get in a chronic stress state and something holds them there, something keeps them down. Let me give you an example of this. This is a real life example of what this could look like. And this is gonna kind of portray the domino effect that happens with disease. Something triggers something, which triggers two other bad things, which triggers three other bad things, and it just goes in this downward spiral. And you'll see how people could get locked into the stress state really easily. Now remember, it could happen from physical, emotional, or chemical trauma. Let me give you an example of emotional trauma. And there's probably hundreds of ways this can go, but let me just give you an example in this direction. Let's say you're doing relatively fine. Then tragedy strikes your home. Maybe there's a loss in your home. You've lost a loved one, parent, child, spouse, somebody, and you're stressing hard about it. You're under a lot of emotional grief. Now, you're stressing, right? So that's put you in a sympathetic stress state. So what's happening to your blood pressure? It's going up. What's happening to your cholesterol? It's going up. Insulin, going up. There's lots of toxic stress hormones now in your body as you're stressing over a long period of time. And because you don't feel good, you're looking for comfort, right? You really want to feel better. So maybe you start eating some junk food, some of those comfort foods that don't bring a lot of comfort in the long run. You start eating some of those comfort foods. What's that going to do to the bad bacteria in your gut? Remember we talked about that? The bad bacteria in your gut are fed by junk food, those processed junk foods. So that's going to increase that bad bacteria in your gut, contributing to gut dysbiosis. And maybe you still want a little bit more comfort, so you start drinking a little bit of wine with your meals. Maybe a lot of wine with your meals. What's that do to your B vitamins? That depletes your B vitamins, that alcohol, it's going to deplete that. And not just that, now you have more bad bacteria, and they're going to be eating your B vitamins before you get to them. So now your B vitamins are being depleted, now you got neurological issues. Now this is going to eventually start leading you to depression, insomnia, all kinds of neurological issues. And so now you're actually starting to feel more depressed, because not only are you grieving the loss of a loved one, but now you got these chemical things happening in your body. And not just that, you're having difficulty sleeping. And so what's that cause? More stress. That depression, that inability to sleep because of that imbalance in your gut, more stress. Now your depression, that kind of leads you to having a cranky attitude. And so maybe you're not as polite to the people at work as you used to be. Maybe you're speaking rough with your family. And that's hurting your work relations, that's hurting the family relations. What's that lead to? More stress, more stress. Plus, maybe when you had too much, a lot more of that wine, and it started to impair your judgment. Maybe you said something dumb to someone in your family. That's really hurt your relationships. More stress. So now you're really not feeling good. So you go to the doctor. The doctor looks at you and they do readings and so forth, and he analyzes your situation and says, wow, you have high blood pressure, you have high cholesterol. What's he going to do? He's going to put you on blood pressure meds. He's going to put you on high cholesterol meds. And so now you're on medications that have side effects. But guess one of the side effects of blood pressure medication is, a common side effect? Lack of sleep, inability to sleep. Hey, but you know what? Lack of sleep, you know what that leads to? Higher blood pressure. And so you have this terrible round and round and round, and everything just gets worse and worse and worse. And you're really on a fast track to getting an autoimmune disease. So can you see, as I just paint a picture, and there are probably millions of people that are in situations very similar to what I just described. Multiple layers, multiple factors, keeping them now in a chronic stress state, a chronic situation of stress. And so, and if you look at what started it all, it was an emotional component. And so what you want to do with your situation, you really want to analyze your situation. You want to backtrack. You want to kind of take yourself back to the beginning. You want to analyze, where did it all start, and start working from there. Now, you'll see how not addressing these issues can keep you in a sympathetic state. If you don't understand what's going on in terms of the food you're eating, if you don't understand what's going on with, the alcohol you're drinking, if you don't understand what's going on with the unresolved emotions to the loss you experienced, and if you don't understand what the medications are doing to you, it's going to keep you in that stress state. So it's important to be aware of all the factors. Now this touches on the topic of genetics. Let's talk about genetics a little bit. We're going to talk about it more in the next presentation. There is something called methyl groups. Methyl groups help turn off the stress response in the body. What a methyl group is, it's essentially 3 hydrogen and 1 carbon molecules together. And when these methyl groups get added to different chemical elements in the body, what it does is it changes the shape and function of that element. And they start doing different things. Those elements start changing what they do in the body. Stress burns up these methyl groups really fast. So if you have a certain gene mutation, we're going to talk about this, that causes you not to methylate really well, which helps us have these methyl groups. And most people, by the way, with autoimmune diseases have a genetic issue. We're going to talk more about this. If you are in a stress situation, you're burning those up, you have a methylation issue, you can't use those methyl groups real well, or produce them even, you get in a stress state and you run out of methyl groups, and now chemically you can't turn off your stress state. So now you have a chemical genetic thing that is actually holding you, another factor holding you, keeping you in that chronic stress state. So can you see how if you understand these things, it would help you know what steps to take and how to start getting yourself out of that chronic stress state. It'll help you understand why you don't feel good, why you're cranky all the time, why you don't feel happy anymore. All these things, they will affect neurotransmitter levels, your dopamine, that's your feel-good hormone, gamma, all those things, GABA, excuse me, all those things. It's going to affect all those different hormones and neurotransmitters. All right, so we talked about methyl groups. How do we get more of those? Because that helps us turn off the stress, right? You get them from B vitamins. So you want to stop drinking that alcohol because that depletes B vitamins. You want to stop eating that junk food because that feeds the bad bacteria that eats your B vitamins. You want to start eating lots of salads, leafy greens. That's what you want to go for. And you also probably will need to supplement with B12. So you want to look into that and get as a non-synthetic supplement as possible. So you could be pretty healthy. And if you are not correctly dealing with emotional trauma, still run into a lot of issues. You could still get pretty messed up. And really everything else could be pretty good, just about right. But if you don't resolve emotional trauma, it can actually overthrow just about everything. It's a really big factor. So we want to know, how do we deal with emotional trauma, which generates so much stress in our lives and really is at the root of just about everything. And emotional trauma, this is a key, emotional trauma has to do with how we perceive events. It has everything to do with perception. How do you relate to that event? How do you perceive it? Let me give you an example. Growing up, when I wouldn't have a lot to do, I used to watch a lot of TV, which is actually not good. It's also bad for your, for your well-being. People are more depressed who watch TV, and it's a lot of statistics. Anyhow, I watched a lot of TV, and I would watch talk shows every once in a while. And I don't remember which talk show it was, but it was one of these talk shows, and they had people on, and the talk show was talking about phobias. And it had people on that had all these really strange phobias. And one of the people that was on the talk show had a phobia of pickles, terrible pickle phobia. And to prove this, one of the people from the backstage, they came out with a jar of pickles behind this person that was on the talk show, and the person didn't see the individual with the backstage coming with the jar, and they said, "Hey, turn around," and they had this jar of pickles. The person got up and they freaked out and oh, it's a jar of pickles, and they couldn't handle it. And it seems silly, right? I mean, come on, a jar of pickles? But it's how that person is perceiving that event. It's about perception. They're perceiving through some strange way that a jar of pickles is threatening to their health, threatening to their life situation. And so two people really can go through the exact same situation and come out with two different outcomes. That's entirely possible. Let's do another quick example. Let's say someone loses a job. Two people lose a job. Person A, the first person, it's the worst thing that ever has happened to them. Oh, how am I going to pay rent? They're freaking out. They're just in a terrible situation. Person B goes through it completely differently. They said, this is actually a blessing. I really wasn't happy at this job anyways, and I wanted to pursue a different career, and this kind of, forced me to get out of the nest and to do that. Same situation, two completely different perceptions. And science has found that people can look at past childhood traumas, and if they change the way they perceive that, they could actually change the way they feel and relate to that past childhood traumas, even terrible things. That's powerful, friends. That's really, really good. Well, how do we do that? How do we change our perception? And there's a lot of different ways people try to achieve this, and this gets into the topic of spirituality. People use meditation, people use neuro-linguistic programming, people do tactics like looking into the mirror at themselves and repeating over and over, "I'm not a loser, I'm not a loser," just whatever they say, "I'm gonna be a winner today," these different things, and just repeat it 12 times, 25 times, morning and evening. So there's different things. I'm coming from a Christian perspective, and I'm guessing that probably not everyone that's going to watch this is going to come from a Christian perspective. This is my own experience. The Bible, Jesus, is the only belief system I personally have found that really has given logical, satisfying answers to the troubling issues of life. Really the cry of every soul is unconditional love. That is, I believe, the cry of every single person on this planet. We want to be unconditionally loved. We want someone to love us, not because we're smart, not because we're pretty, not because we're good at things. We want someone to love us because we exist, because I'm here. And that is the scenario. That's what the Bible teaches us, that there's a God in heaven who created you, who loves you, who gave the life of his own son so that you could be with him in heaven forever. That's the message of Scripture. And the realities presented in the Bible are the only true keys that can give us that perception that will enable us to take those traumatizing events and turn them into something that's actually beneficial to you. The truths of the Scriptures are the only things I found, and I believe they're the only things that exist to actually do that. And friends, just anything won't do. And this is why I think the Bible is so important, because you have to ask, what's your basis for the perception change? Is staring in the mirror and saying everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be okay, saying that 25 times, is that going to make everything okay? What if you do lose your job? What if your spouse leaves you anyways? What if the person at the hospital does die? Is staring in the mirror going to change that? When you're coming out of depression, when you're dealing with stress, only truth will do. It has to be on the basis of something 100% reliable. And I found that the only thing that fits that description is God and the Bible. So you want to spend time every day in study. There's a lot of negative thoughts out there. You want to spend every time with God in Bible study and prayer. Okay, quick 5-step formula to overcome any emotional challenge. Step number 1, you're having your devotionals already. Run to God. In an emergency, in a trial, don't deal with it all by yourself. You run to God. Step number 2, choose God's will. You choose to do the will of God, even above what you feel. Step number 3, admit your weakness. Admit, God, I don't have what it takes. I'm freaking out. I feel terrible. I don't have what it takes here. Step number 4, claim a promise in the Bible. Claim a promise in the Bible. And step number 5, move forward in faith. This is a practical application of righteousness by faith. And I'll tell you, supernatural things happen when you do this. I have been in situations where I've just been hunkered down with heavy burdens. I go through this process. By the time I'm quoting a scripture and trusting it and believing it, that burden just lifts. Awesome supernatural things happen. And so practice this. I really encourage you to put this into practice. And if you can't remember all 5, if you can only remember 1, just remember step 4. Quote a passage of Scripture, trusting it and believing it. Quote a specific Bible passage. So if the devil tells you you're never going to get better, you're worthless, you quote a Bible passage that counteracts that. This is going to be reprogramming your beliefs. So it takes practice. I encourage you to practice it. I hope this has been insightful and a blessing to you. May you be blessed in your pursuit of health.